Hello everyone. Tonight we will be working on Module 1, Lesson 7, and we're going to be rounding decimals using place value and a vertical number line. One of the things that's going to be very important in this lesson and from here on out is being a little flexible in our thinking about numbers. For example, I could write the number 1 here in the ones place, and of course 1 is 1, 1. But I can also think about it in other ways besides that. I could also think of 1 as being 10 tenths. Or I could think of 1 as being 100 hundredths, or 1,000 thousandths. So depending on the unit I want to use for my reference point, the number itself can be represented in many ways as 1, 10, 100, or 1,000. Now, let's take the number 155. 155 can also be represented in different ways depending on the unit that we are concerned with. 155 can be seen as 100, 5 tens, and 5 ones. That's the way we've been thinking about numbers for the past week or so. But I could also think of this number as being 15 tens and 5 ones. I have 100, and that in every 100 there are 10 tens, and that's how I got from 105 tens to 15 tens. And of course, I could think of this number as being 155 ones. I could have 155 ones instead of one group of 100, 5 groups of 10, and 5 groups of 1. I could just have them all smushed into one big group of 155. Now, thinking about these numbers in different ways is important when we want to round. So let's say that I'm going to round 155. And I may want to round it first to the nearest 100. We're going to be using a vertical number line, which is really the same as a horizontal number line. It's just tipped up on its end. And the reason that we start using them is so later in the year when we're working with quadrants, we'll understand that that the coordinate plane is really just 2 number lines, one that's horizontal, one that's vertical, and they cross each other. So when we're working with the number line, we are going to look at the greatest place, which is 100, okay? I'm thinking of this number right now as 100, 5 tens, and 5 ones. And I know that the number is someplace between 100 and 200. So I'm going to write my low number down below. And for our purposes right now, we're going to orient our number line so it goes from the low numbers on the bottom to the high numbers on the top. That's because that's the way it sits in a coordinate plane. A number line could be going in any direction, and the numbers could be lower and higher in any direction. We're just going to agree that for now, the low numbers are going to be on the bottom, and the high numbers are going to be on the top. Now I know, whoops, I'm trying to write, my stylus is not working so well today. So I know that 155 is somewhere between 100 and 200. So I'm writing my low on the bottom, my high on the top, And then the next thing I need to do is write the number that's right in between. And in order to find the number that is in the middle, I just need to go one place over. So I'm working with the hundreds place, and in one place over I'm going to put a 5 because 5 is halfway between 0 and 10. And then I have to put in my 0. So I know that 150 is halfway between 100 and 200. Then I'm going to take the number that I'm rounding and I'm going to put it on the number line. So I need to compare this number to my midpoint. This is why we've been working on comparing numbers and decimals for the last few days. Now 155 is going to be just a little bit larger than 150. And so I know that when it rounds, it's a little bit higher than the midpoint, so it's going to round up to 200. So 155 is going to round to 200. Now we're going to work with a number that is has some decimals involved, and that number is 1 and 57 hundredths. So I can think of it as having 1, 5 tenths, and 7 hundredths. Another way I could think of it is having 15 tenths and 7 hundredths. Or I could think of it as being just 157 tenths, all in one big group. It depends on I need to have that flexibility of thinking, so I know I'm going to be able to group it the way that I want to achieve my purpose. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to round this number 3 different ways. Actually, I'm only going to round it 2 different ways. First of all, I'm going to round 1 and 57 hundredths to the nearest whole. And when I say to the nearest whole, what I mean is to the ones place. So I'm going to think of this number as being in between 1 and 2. I always look at my first, or the digit on the left, to figure out the low. So the low will be 1, and the next the high number on my number line will be 2, because 1 and 57 hundredths is going to fall someplace between 1 and 2. Now the midpoint between 1 and 2 will be 1 and 5 tenths, or I could call it 50 hundredths. 5 tenths and 50 hundredths have the same value. They're 2 different ways of saying the same thing, so we need that flexibility of thinking again. So 1 and 50 hundredths is the midpoint between 1 and 2, and now I'm going to put 1 and 57 hundredths onto my number line. It's a little bit larger than 1 and 50 hundredths. It's a little bit closer to 2, so I can see that it's going to round up to 2. It's closer to 2 than it is to 1. So then I can say that 1 and 57 hundredths rounds to 2. Okay, now let's round 1 and 57 hundredths to the nearest tenth instead of the nearest whole. That means that instead of thinking of this as 1 and 1 whole, 5 tenths, and 7 hundredths, I'm going to think of it as 15 tenths plus 7 hundredths more. Okay, so now I'm going to use the 15 tenths as my low number. My high number will be 1/10 more, so 16 tenths. And I should label them on my number line so I don't get confused later when I write my answer. Okay? And in between, halfway in between 15 and 16 is going to be 15.5, but in this case it's going to be 155 hundredths. And I can see that I've got the right unit because this was 1 57 hundredths, which is the same as 157 hundredths. It's going to be just a little more than 155 hundredths, so I know that it's going to round up to 16 tenths. And then I'm going to write 1 57 hundredths rounds to, and I want to write 16 tenths in standard form when I'm writing my answer, so I'm going to change 16 tenths into 1 6/10. Okay, now it's your turn. You are going to round 4 381 thousandths to the nearest 10, 1, 10th, and 100th. I'm going to go ahead and show you how it would look in the place value chart. When you're rounding to the nearest 10, you're going to want to put 0, 4 ones, 3 tenths, 8 hundredths, and 1 thousandth. Okay? And I know for this one, my answer will be in between 0 and 1. So I need to decide, am I rounding down to 0 or up to 1 when I'm rounding to the nearest 10. When I round to the nearest whole or the nearest 1, then I'm thinking of, I'm going to write 4 wholes, 3 tenths, 8 hundredths, and 1,000. And I'm going to be concerned about the ones place. Is this number, it's going to be between 4 ones and 5 ones, and I'll be looking at the tenths place to decide whether it's closer to 4 or 5 wholes. When I am rounding to the nearest tenth, then I'm going to express this number as 43 tenths, 8 hundredths, and 1,000th. And I'm going to have to decide whether the number is closer to 43 tenths or 44 tenths. And I'll be looking at the number in the hundredths place and deciding, using that to help me decide if this number is closer to 43 tenths or 44 tenths. And finally, I'm going to be thinking of this number as 438 hundredths and 1,000th more, and I will know that it has to be between 438 thousandths and 438 hundredths and 439 hundredths. And I need to know whether I should round down to 438 hundredths or up to 439 thousandths. And once you do your rounding, don't forget to write your answer oh boy, I'm not doing a very good job writing here. Write in standard form. So while we're working with the vertical number line, we're thinking in unit form. Depending on the unit that we're rounding to, that's the unit we'll use on our number line. But when we write our answers, we want to make sure that we write the answer in standard form. Change those unit forms to standard form like we practiced in class on Monday. Okay, good luck. I hope you have fun and do a great job. I'll see you in class tomorrow.